Sometimes, life-changing moments don't arrive with thunderous applause or grand proclamations. They sneak in during quiet conversations, in seemingly trivial wagers, or under the glow of a city's dazzling skyline. For Ethan Wallace, the billionaire tech mogul, with a penchant for control and an unshakable belief in his own invincibility, such a moment began with a simple bet. What seemed like a harmless challenge at a gala in Manhattan would unravel his world and rebuild it in ways he could never imagine. This is a story of transformation, of a man whose arrogance collided with the resilience of a woman whose roots ran deeper than any skyscraper he owned. It's about choices, redemption, and the courage to confront who you truly are when the masks are stripped away. Ethan Wallace never played a game he couldn't win. But what happens when the stakes go beyond wealth and pride? What happens when the game isn't about winning, but about earning something no money could ever buy? The room was alive with the kind of buzz only New York's elite could generate. Chandeliers bathed the hall in warm light, reflecting off the polished floors and sparkling champagne flutes. The Winter Gala, held at Manhattan's prestigious Metropolitan Club, was the highlight of the season, where tech billionaires, fashion icons, and socialites mingled effortlessly. Ethan Wallace, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, stood at the center of it all, radiating confidence. His tailored suit was immaculate, his smile magnetic, and his aura unmistakably dominant. "You're incorrigible, Ethan," said Brian Carter, his oldest friend and a journalist, notorious for his biting wit. Brian leaned against the bar, swirling a glass of scotch with an amused smirk. Another year, another gala, another string of meaningless conquests. "Tell me, do you ever tire of being the golden boy?" Ethan chuckled, sipping his own drink. "Not when I'm this good at it. Come on, Brian. Life's a game, and I'm playing to win." Brian raised an eyebrow. "And yet, for all your wins, you haven't settled down. Let me guess. Too busy? Too focused? Or is it that no one's good enough for the great Ethan Wallace?" Ethan's smirk faltered, but only slightly. "I've got time for that. When it matters, right now, I'm building an empire." Brian wasn't convinced. "Or maybe," he countered, "you're scared. Scared of what happens when you meet someone who doesn't fall for the billionaire charm." Ethan scoffed. "There's no one who wouldn't. People want power, and I have it." Brian leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Let's make it interesting then." A bet Ethan's curiosity piqued. He tilted his head, gesturing for Brian to continue. "Go on." Brian straightened, raising his glass in mock salute. "I bet you can't marry someone outside your type, the glamorous socialite crowd you're used to, and make it work for 6 months. No bailing, no shortcuts. Stay married. Prove there's more to you than charm and money." Ethan laughed, but the sound carried a nervous edge. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Brian pressed, his smirk widening. "What's the matter, Wallace? Afraid you can't win this one?" Ethan's jaw tightened. The challenge was a needle to his pride. "And what's in it for me if I do?" Brian raised his glass higher. "A cool $1,000,000, donated to the charity of your choice. And of course, the satisfaction of proving me wrong." Ethan's smile returned, confident as ever. "Fine," he said, extending a hand. "You're on." Their handshake sealed the deal, but Brian's eyes glinted with mischief. "Oh, I've got just the woman in mind," he said. As if on cue, Ethan's gaze swept the room and landed on Harper Reynolds. She wasn't clad in shimmering designer gowns like the others. Her understated dress and easy grace were almost out of place among the opulence. She laughed with a group of guests, her expression warm and unguarded. Something about her struck Ethan as unpolished, but there was a quiet strength in her demeanor that piqued his interest. "That's Harper," Brian said, noting Ethan's gaze. "School counselor, volunteers at a library in Brooklyn. Cares more about her students than the money she makes. She's as grounded as they come." Ethan snorted. "Doesn't sound like someone who'd agree to this." Brian shrugged, feigning innocence. "That's for you to figure out. Or are you backing out already?" Ethan's competitive nature flared. Backing out wasn't an option. "You'll regret this, Brian," he said with a smirk. "I always win." But as Harper's laughter floated across the room, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the one game he wasn't prepared to play. The heart of Brooklyn was alive with the rhythm of a typical weekday morning: honking cabs, hurried footsteps on cracked sidewalks, and the occasional bark of a dog. Among the chaos stood the town's public library, an unassuming red brick building, nestled between a row of quaint shops. Inside, the buzz of city life softened into a quiet hum. Rows of bookshelves stretched toward high ceilings, casting long shadows on polished wooden floors. At a corner table, Harper Reynolds flipped through a stack of children's books, her glasses perched precariously on her nose. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, strands framing her face as she reviewed the worn pages. Around her, children scribbled on coloring sheets, while a few parents exchanged pleasantries by the coffee station. Harper had always felt at home here. The library wasn't just a repository of books. It was a sanctuary, a safe space for the community's youth. For her, every child that wandered in was a story waiting to unfold. Today, her focus was on curating books for the library's upcoming literacy program, a project close to her heart. Meanwhile, Ethan Wallace approached the library's grand entrance, adjusting the lapels of his tailored blazer. He hesitated before stepping inside, the unfamiliarity of the space evident in the way his gaze darted from the bookshelves to the chatter of children. This wasn't his usual domain of boardrooms or five-star hotels, yet here he was, carrying out the first phase of his plan. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice smooth but louder than necessary in the hushed environment. Several heads turned, including Harper's. She looked up, her curiosity piqued by the man, who seemed as out of place as a peacock in a pigeon coop. "Yes," she asked, standing up from her seat. Ethan walked toward her with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. He extended a hand, his smile practiced. "Ethan Wallace. I'm here to discuss potential funding for the library's literacy programs." Harper blinked, momentarily taken aback. She wasn't accustomed to men in designer suits wandering into her domain, much less offering financial support. "Harper Reynolds," she replied, shaking his hand briefly before retracting it. "We weren't expecting anyone today." "I thought I'd stop by unannounced," Ethan said, gesturing around. "Get a feel for the place before discussing specifics." Harper crossed her arms, her brow furrowing slightly. "That's unusual. Most people call ahead." Ethan chuckled, his charm in full swing. "I find spontaneity keeps things interesting." Harper raised an eyebrow. "Interesting isn't always efficient." Her tone was cool, almost dismissive, and Ethan found himself momentarily at a loss. He wasn't used to being met with anything less than enthusiasm. "I noticed your literacy programs in a recent article," Ethan said, steering the conversation back on track. "I wanted to see how my company might help expand those efforts." Harper nodded, her skepticism barely masked. "Well, funding is always appreciated, but our work is more than just a line item in a budget. It's about building trust, relationships, and commitment to the community. Are you prepared for that?" The directness of her question caught Ethan off guard. He paused, weighing his response carefully. Of course, he said, flashing his most disarming smile. Harper didn't seem convinced. I see. Well, let me give you a quick tour then, she said, gesturing for him to follow. As they walked through the aisles, Harper pointed out various initiatives: the early literacy program for preschoolers, a homework help center for teenagers, and a quiet corner dedicated to adult learners. Ethan listened politely, but his focus kept drifting to Harper herself. Her passion was evident in the way she spoke, her hands gesturing animatedly as she described the impact these programs had on the community. And here, Harper said, stopping by a bulletin board filled with hand-drawn thank you notes, are messages from some of the children we've helped. This one's my favorite. She plucked a note off the board and handed it to Ethan. It read, "Thank you for teaching me how to read. Now, I can help my little brother with his homework. Love, Mia." Ethan stared at the note, the sincerity of it unexpectedly tugging at something deep inside him. "That's impressive," he said, his usual eloquence faltering. Harper studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to discern his intentions. "So, Mr. Wallace, what exactly made you want to support us?" Ethan hesitated, realizing he hadn't prepared an answer to this inevitable question. "I believe in giving back," he said, his voice measured. "Convenient," Harper replied, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. "Well, I appreciate your interest, but as you can see, we have a lot of work to do. If you'd like to make a donation, I'd be happy to connect you with our funding coordinator." Ethan smiled, though Harper's polite dismissal didn't sit well with him. She wasn't fawning over his offer, nor was she impressed by his wealth. It was refreshing. "I'll be in touch," Ethan said, offering a nod as he turned to leave. Harper watched him go, a small smile playing on her lips. "Interesting," she murmured to herself before returning to her work. As Ethan stepped outside, the crisp air hit him, and for the first time in years, he felt the thrill of uncertainty. Harper Reynolds wasn't going to make this easy, and for reasons he couldn't yet articulate, he found himself looking forward to the challenge. The chilly air of Brooklyn lingered as Harper Reynolds unlocked the door to her modest apartment. The warm aroma of lavender greeted her, a familiar comfort in a space she'd lovingly decorated with second-hand furniture, framed photographs, and soft throw blankets. She placed her bag on the kitchen counter, her thoughts still on the peculiar encounter with Ethan Wallace at the library. Wealthy benefactors weren't rare in her line of work, but something about Ethan's polished charm didn't sit quite right. A knock on the door pulled her out of her musings. Harper frowned, not expecting anyone at this hour. When she opened the door, her surprise turned to mild irritation. "Ethan Wallace," she said flatly, her hand still on the doorknob. "This is unexpected." Ethan stood there, holding a sleek leather folder, his ever-confident smile intact. "I thought it would be better to continue our discussion in a more comfortable setting." "Discussion?" Harper crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "I wasn't aware there was one to continue." "May I come in?" he asked, glancing past her into the apartment. Harper hesitated, but her curiosity got the better of her. She stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. Ethan walked in, his sharp gaze scanning the cozy living room. He noted the mismatched cushions, a stack of books on the coffee table, and a faint scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. It was worlds apart from the sterile luxury of his penthouse. "Nice place," he said, his tone genuine. "It feels lived in." "Thanks," Harper replied curtly, closing the door behind him. "Now, what's this about?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression shifting to something almost serious. "I have a proposal for you." Harper's brows knitted together as she took a seat on the armrest of her couch. "A proposal?" Ethan opened the leather folder, revealing a meticulously typed contract. He handed it to her, his demeanor poised. I'm offering a mutually beneficial arrangement. A 6-month marriage contract. Harper blinked, the absurdity of his words taking a moment to register. Excuse me? You heard me, Ethan said, his tone calm, as if this were a routine business deal. You marry me for 6 months. In return, I'll provide significant funding for your community programs, enough to expand them statewide. Harper stared at him, her shock quickly giving way to irritation. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Ethan replied, taking a seat across from her. Your programs are doing incredible work, but they're underfunded. With my resources, you could help 10 times as many people. And all I have to do is marry you? Harper asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. Why? Ethan leaned back, his expression unreadable. Let's just say it's a personal challenge. But for you, it's an opportunity to make a real difference. Harper set the contract down on the coffee table, her arms crossed. This is ridiculous. I don't even know you. Which is why I came here tonight, Ethan said smoothly. To give you the chance to get to know me and to consider what this could mean for your work. Harper shook her head, standing abruptly. This isn't a charity auction, Mr. Wallace. I'm not for sale. I'm not asking you to compromise your values, Ethan said, rising to meet her gaze. This isn't about control or ownership. It's a partnership, one that could benefit both of us. Harper let out a sharp laugh, pacing to the window. You really believe money can solve everything, don't you? Not everything, Ethan admitted, his voice softening. But it can solve a lot. The sincerity in his tone caught Harper off guard. She turned to face him, her arms still crossed. And what happens after 6 months? What's your plan then? We part ways, Ethan said simply. No strings attached. Harper stared at him, searching for any sign of insincerity. You're unbelievable. Take your time, Ethan said, motioning to the contract. Read it over. Think about what it could mean for your programs, for the kids who need them. Before Harper could respond, another knock echoed through the apartment. She sighed, opening the door to reveal Maya Brooks, her best friend and confidant. Harper, you won't believe. Maya stopped mid-sentence when she saw Ethan. Her eyes narrowed. Who's this? Ethan Wallace, he introduced himself, extending a hand. A potential business partner. Maya ignored the gesture, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Business partner? She repeated, her tone skeptical. It's a long story, Harper muttered, gesturing for Maya to sit. Ethan was just leaving. Ethan smiled, unfazed. I'll leave you to discuss it, he said, grabbing his coat. But think about it, Harper. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. With that, he left, the door clicking shut behind him. Maya turned to Harper, her expression incredulous. What the hell was that about? Harper sighed, collapsing onto the couch. He wants me to marry him. What? Maya's voice rose an octave. Are you kidding me? Harper handed her the contract, rubbing her temples. 6 months, funding for the programs, and then it's over. Maya skimmed the document, her eyes widening. This is insane. You can't seriously be considering it. I'm not, Harper said firmly. But the funding could change everything. It could help so many kids. And what about you? Maya asked, her tone softer now. Do you really want to tie yourself to a guy like that, even for 6 months? Harper didn't answer, her mind racing. She knew the risks, but the potential rewards were undeniable. For years, she'd struggled to keep the programs afloat, sacrificing her own stability to ensure the kids had a chance. Could she really turn this down? Maya placed a hand on her shoulder. Harper, you've worked too hard to let some billionaire's whims derail your life. Be careful. Harper nodded, her resolve hardening. I will. But as she stared at the contract, she couldn't shake the feeling that this decision, whatever she chose, would change everything. The cold gray sky mirrored the tension of the day as Harper Reynolds stood outside the courthouse, her breath visible in the crisp air. She glanced at her reflection in the courthouse's glass doors, a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a low bun, and no trace of the elaborate ceremonies she'd imagined as a child. This wasn't the dream wedding she'd envisioned. It was a transaction, plain and simple. Ethan Wallace, her soon-to-be husband, approached with his usual confidence. Clad in a tailored suit that likely cost more than her entire wardrobe, he looked every bit the billionaire playboy. His expression was calm, though Harper noticed the slight furrow in his brow as his eyes met hers. "You're early," he said, his tone neutral. "So are you," Harper replied, her voice steady but cold. She didn't intend to make this easy for him. Behind Ethan, Brian Carter stepped out of a sleek black car, his smirk as sharp as ever. He was here as a witness, though Harper suspected he was more interested in observing how the bet would unfold. Maya, Harper's best friend, arrived moments later, her concerned gaze darting between Harper and Ethan. Maya pulled Harper aside, gripping her arm tightly. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered urgently. "You don't have to go through with it." "I know," Harper said softly, her resolve unwavering. "But this isn't about him. It's about the kids. The funding will change everything." Maya sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Harper assured her. But deep down, she wasn't entirely certain. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was stark and clinical. The judge, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and glasses perched on her nose, presided over the brief ceremony. The room was nearly empty, save for Maya, Brian, and a Ewart clerk, who shuffled papers with practiced indifference. As the judge read through the legal formalities, Harper stole a glance at Ethan. He appeared composed, his hands clasped in front of him, but there was an unmistakable tension in his jaw. For all his bravado, he wasn't immune to the gravity of the situation. "Do you, Ethan Wallace, take Harper Reynolds to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold for better or worse, until the terms of this marriage are fulfilled?" the judge intoned, her voice dry and mechanical. "I do," Ethan said smoothly, his tone devoid of emotion. "And do you, Harper Reynolds, take Ethan Wallace to be your lawfully wedded husband, under the same terms?" Harper hesitated for the briefest moment, her eyes locking with Ethan's. Then she nodded. "I do." The judge stamped the paperwork with a decisive thud. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife." No applause, no celebratory cheers, just silence. As they exited the courthouse, Maya pulled Harper into a tight hug. "Call me if you need anything," she murmured. Her concern was palpable, and Harper appreciated it more than she could express. Brian, meanwhile, clapped Ethan on the back. "Well, you've done it," he said with a sly grin. "Let's see how long it takes before she drives you insane." Ethan ignored him, his attention focused on Harper. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward the waiting car. Harper nodded reluctantly. She climbed into the sleek black vehicle, the leather seats cool against her skin. Ethan followed, sitting beside her in tense silence. The car ride to Ethan's penthouse was quiet, save for the hum of the engine. Harper stared out the window, watching the city blur past. The enormity of what she'd just done began to sink in, but she pushed the doubts aside. This was for the community, she reminded herself, for the kids. When they arrived at the towering glass building that housed Ethan's penthouse, Harper felt a pang of unease. The doorman greeted them with a polite nod, and the elevator whisked them to the top floor in moments. The penthouse was as opulent as Harper had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline, and every piece of furniture seemed designed to scream wealth and power. But the space felt cold, devoid of warmth or personality. "This is it," Ethan said, gesturing vaguely to the expansive living room. "Make yourself at home." Harper raised an eyebrow. "Generous of you," Ethan smirked. "Well, it's ours for the next 6 months." She dropped her bag on the nearest chair, surveying the room. "I'll need a workspace," she said bluntly, "and don't expect me to abandon my schedule at the community center." "Of course," Ethan said, his tone smooth but dismissive. "Do whatever you need." Harper crossed her arms. "I mean it, Ethan. This isn't just about you." Ethan's smile faltered, and for a moment, something resembling respect flickered in his eyes. "Noted." Later that evening, Harper found herself standing by the massive windows, gazing out at the city lights. The view was breathtaking, but it only served to remind her how far removed this world was from her own. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Ethan approaching with 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," he said, holding out a glass. Harper hesitated before accepting it. "To 6 months," she corrected, clinking her glass against his. Ethan chuckled, his gaze unwavering. "You're going to keep surprising me, aren't you?" Harper met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "You have no idea." That night, as Harper settled into the guest room Ethan had prepared for her, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a battle. Ethan might think he held all the cards, but Harper had no intention of playing by his rules. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring into his glass of wine. For the first time, he felt a twinge of doubt. Harper was unlike anyone he'd ever met, uncompromising, fiercely independent, and completely unimpressed by his wealth. The bet had seemed simple enough, but now, he wasn't so sure. Both of them went to bed that night, unaware of just how much their lives were about to change. The sharp contrast between Ethan Wallace's world of extravagance and Harper Reynolds' grounded reality became glaringly evident in the days following their courthouse wedding. Ethan's penthouse, with its panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline and luxurious decor, seemed like a different planet compared to the vibrant but modest community center Harper had poured her heart into. Their 2 worlds clashed daily, setting the stage for a series of confrontations neither had anticipated. Harper's mornings began early, as they always had. By the time the sun peeked through the towering skyscrapers, she was already dressed and ready to leave for the community center. She moved through the penthouse with quiet efficiency, ignoring the opulence around her. Her only pause came when she saw the catered breakfast spread Ethan had arranged. Croissants, smoked salmon, freshly squeezed juices. It was a scene out of a luxury hotel. "Good morning," Ethan's voice drawled from the dining area as he sauntered in, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. "Morning," Harper replied curtly, grabbing a piece of toast. "I won't be here for breakfast most days. No need to go overboard." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of amusement and mild offense. "It's just breakfast. Consider it a perk." "I don't need perks," Harper said, her tone firm. "I have work to do." Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her with a curious smile. "Ah, yes, the community center. Do you really think what you're doing there makes a difference?" Harper froze mid-step, her grip tightening on her coffee cup. "Excuse me?" Ethan shrugged. "I'm just saying, Your time might be better spent doing something that has a larger impact. Think bigger. Her jaw tightened. Not everything is about scale or money, Ethan. Sometimes the biggest impact comes from small, meaningful actions. Before he could respond, Harper was already heading out the door, leaving him standing in the kitchen, his usual confidence slightly shaken. Determined to understand Harper's world, or perhaps to prove a point, Ethan decided to visit the community center unannounced. When he arrived, he was greeted by the cacophony of children's laughter and the sound of basketballs bouncing on the court. The modest building stood in stark contrast to the sleek glass skyscrapers Ethan was used to. Inside, Harper was leading a group of teenagers in a creative writing workshop. She moved with ease among them, offering encouragement and constructive feedback. The kids clearly respected her, their faces lighting up as she praised their efforts. Ethan leaned against the doorway, observing the scene. He had expected chaos, perhaps even dysfunction. Instead, he saw a well-organized, vibrant community that thrived under Harper's guidance. When Harper finally noticed him, her expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" "Just wanted to see what all the fuss was about," Ethan said casually. "This isn't your world, Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm. "You don't get to waltz in here and judge what we're doing." "I'm not judging," he replied, raising his hands defensively. "I'm curious." Harper narrowed her eyes, but returned to her work, leaving Ethan to explore the center on his own. He wandered through the classrooms and activity rooms, noting the peeling paint and outdated equipment. Despite the lack of resources, the energy in the building was palpable. It was clear to him that Harper's work mattered, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. That evening, back at the penthouse, tensions boiled over. Harper returned home to find Ethan on the phone, discussing plans for a gala. He ended the call as she walked in, his smile as sharp as ever. "Busy day?" he asked, his tone bordering on patronizing. "Productive," Harper replied, setting her bag down. "Yours?" "Quite," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "I've arranged a charity gala for the center. Thought it might help raise some funds." Harper's eyes narrowed. "You did what?" "It's for a good cause," Ethan said smoothly. "And you'll get the exposure you need to expand your programs." "I didn't ask for your help," Harper snapped. "And I certainly don't need you making decisions for me or the center." Ethan's expression darkened. "You're being unreasonable. I'm trying to help." "Help?" Harper's voice rose. "This isn't about helping. It's about control. You want to swoop in, throw money at the problem, and feel good about yourself. But that's not how this works." Ethan set his glass down with more force than necessary. "Maybe if you stopped being so stubborn, you'd see that I'm trying to make a difference." "I don't need your version of a difference," Harper shot back. "What we're doing at the center works because it's personal, not some flashy PR stunt." The argument ended with Harper retreating to her room, slamming the door behind her. Ethan stared at the closed door, frustration bubbling beneath his composed exterior. For the first time he realized that winning this bet might require more than charm and money. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself drawn back to the community center. This time, he volunteered to tutor a group of elementary students in math. It was a disaster. The kids were rowdy, uninterested, and quick to point out his lack of experience. "Miss Harper makes it fun," one of the kids said bluntly, crossing her arms. "You're boring." Ethan couldn't help but laugh at the brutal honesty. "Well, I'm not Miss Harper," he admitted, "but I'm trying." By the end of the session, he was exhausted but oddly satisfied. He had a newfound respect for Harper's patience and dedication. The kids might not have learned much math that day, But Ethan had learned something far more valuable. Harper's work was not as simple or insignificant as he had assumed. That evening, Ethan found Harper on the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. She didn't acknowledge his presence as he approached, but she didn't move away either. "I visited the center again today," he said, after a long silence. "Tried to help with math tutoring." Harper glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And?" "It was harder than I expected," he admitted, a wry smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in days, Harper smiled, just a faint curve of her lips, but it was enough to give Ethan a glimmer of hope. "You don't have to agree with me, Ethan," she said softly. "But if you're going to be part of this, you need to respect what we're doing." "I'm starting to see that," Ethan said, his voice sincere. The silence that followed wasn't tense, but comfortable. For a brief moment, it felt like they were on the same side. The days following Ethan Wallace's growing understanding of Harper Reynolds' world were marked by subtle shifts in their dynamic. Yet true to his nature, Ethan couldn't resist testing the boundaries. Beneath the surface of his seemingly sincere gestures, he began to weave a web of manipulation, determined to regain control over a situation that was slipping through his fingers. What he hadn't anticipated was Harper's unrelenting strength, her resolve sharper than any challenge he'd faced before. Ethan's strategy began, innocuously enough. A few well-timed calls, minor adjustments to Harper's carefully planned community events. He justified it to himself as a way of streamlining her efforts, but in reality, it was his attempt to remind her of his influence. The first instance came when Harper's Community Center was scheduled to host a guest speaker, a local author beloved by the youth. Harper had spent weeks coordinating the event, and it was poised to be a highlight of the month. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan used his connections to redirect the author to a different engagement. A last-minute urgent request from one of Ethan's influential acquaintances. When Harper arrived at the center that evening, she was greeted by the confused faces of her students and the apologetic expressions of her staff. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice tight with frustration. "The author canceled," one of her staff members explained. "They said they had another commitment." Harper's eyes narrowed, suspicion gnawing at her. It wasn't until she returned to the penthouse later that night that her fears were confirmed. Ethan was lounging on the couch, a glass of scotch in hand, his expression smugly amused. "You had something to do with this, didn't you?" Harper accused, her tone sharp. Ethan didn't even bother feigning innocence. "I thought you might appreciate the opportunity to showcase your adaptability. Isn't that what you're always preaching to those kids?" Harper's glare could have melted steel. "You don't get to interfere with my work, Ethan. This isn't a game." "Everything's a game," Ethan retorted, his voice cool. "You're just upset because you didn't see the move coming." Refusing to let Ethan's machinations derail her efforts, Harper rallied her team and salvaged the evening with an impromptu storytelling session. She stood before the crowd, weaving a tale of resilience and hope that captivated her audience. By the end of the night, the disappointment of the canceled speaker had faded, replaced by admiration for Harper's ability to turn adversity into inspiration. Ethan, who had discreetly attended the event to observe the fallout of his interference, found himself unexpectedly impressed. Harper's determination was unyielding, her ability to adapt remarkable. For the first time, he began to question the effectiveness of his tactics. Back at the penthouse, Harper confronted him again. "You may think you can manipulate everything and everyone around you," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But you're wrong. I won't let you sabotage what I've built." Ethan smirked, though the confidence behind it was starting to waver. "We'll see about that." Meanwhile, Brian Carter, Ethan's sharp-tongued friend, had been observing the unfolding drama with growing concern. During one of their frequent lunches, he pressed Ethan for answers. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" Brian asked, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "This isn't like you, Ethan. You're usually more efficient." Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine. "I'm just testing the waters, seeing how far she'll go before she cracks." Brian frowned. "And what if she doesn't crack? What if she's stronger than you give her credit for?" Ethan's smile faltered. He hated admitting it, even to himself, but Brian's words hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Harper wasn't like anyone he'd encountered before. The more he tried to bend her to his will, the more she resisted, and the more he found himself drawn to her unwavering strength. Undeterred, Ethan escalated his efforts. He used his influence to delay shipments of supplies to the community center, disrupted Harper's meeting schedules, and even arranged for surprise inspections to inconvenience her operations. Each time, Harper countered with grace and ingenuity, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. One evening, Harper returned home to find Ethan waiting for her, a satisfied grin on his face. "Tough day?" he asked, his tone dripping with feigned concern. Harper didn't respond immediately. Instead, she dropped her bag onto the counter and fixed him with a piercing stare. "Is this really how you want to spend your time, Ethan?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. "Trying to prove you're smarter than me? Because all you're proving is how petty you can be." Ethan's grin faded, replaced by a flicker of defensiveness. "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Then stop interfering with my work," Harper said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If you think this is winning, you're sorely mistaken." As the weeks went on, Ethan began to notice a shift in his own behavior. The games he had started with the intention of asserting control now felt hollow. Each attempt to outmaneuver Harper only served to highlight her resilience and his own growing frustration. One evening, after another fruitless attempt to disrupt Harper's plans, Ethan found himself alone in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. The lights of Manhattan, once a symbol of his success, now seemed cold and distant. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing, not just the bet, but something far more important. When Harper returned home that night, she found Ethan in the living room, uncharacteristically subdued. "Harper," he said quietly, turning to face her. "I think I owe you an apology." She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "For what, exactly?" "For everything," Ethan admitted, his voice unsteady. "For trying to control you, for underestimating you, for being a complete ass." Harper studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed and sat down across from him. "I'm not sure what your game is this time," she said, her tone wary. "But if you're serious about changing, it's going to take more than an apology." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "I know. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes." For the first time, Harper saw a flicker of sincerity in Ethan's eyes. Whether it was genuine or another ploy remained to be seen, but it was enough to give her pause. Ethan's games had backfired, forcing him to confront not only Harper's unyielding resolve, but also the cracks in his own facade. As the lines between manipulation and genuine change began to blur, both Ethan and Harper found themselves at a crossroads, unsure of what the future would hold. The tension between Ethan Wallace and Harper Reynolds had been building steadily, a tightrope stretched thin by their clashing values and Ethan's relentless attempts to assert control. But every game has its tipping point, and this chapter marked the moment where everything began to unravel. Ethan's grandiose world took center stage at the annual Wallace Foundation Charity Gala, an event known for its opulence and exclusivity. Held in a glittering ballroom at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels, the event was a showcase of wealth and influence, with a guest list that read like a who's who of high society. For Harper, the gala was a stark contrast to the humble, community-centered events she dedicated her life to organizing. She had reluctantly agreed to attend, her presence more a formality than a genuine desire to engage with Ethan's world. As she walked into the ballroom, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, Harper immediately felt out of place amidst the sea of designer couture and polished veneers. Ethan greeted her with a confident smile, his hand resting lightly on her back as he guided her through the crowd. "You look stunning," he said, his tone smooth. Harper gave him a tight smile. "Thanks. Let's just get through this." As the evening unfolded, Harper's discomfort grew. Conversations were shallow, revolving around investments, acquisitions, and power plays. The stark contrast to her daily work with struggling families and disadvantaged youth was jarring. Her frustration simmered beneath the surface, barely concealed, as she watched Ethan effortlessly navigate the room, his charm on full display. The breaking point came during a candid conversation with Brian Carter. Harper found herself cornered by Ethan's childhood friend, who had been watching the dynamic between the couple with a mix of amusement and concern. "You don't belong here," Brian said bluntly, his gaze piercing. Harper bristled. "Thanks for stating the obvious." Brian smirked, but quickly turned serious. "Listen, Harper, I know Ethan better than anyone. He's not exactly the romantic type. So, what's the real story here?" Harper hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But before she could respond, Brian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me guess. It's about the bet, isn't it?" The words hit Harper like a punch to the gut. Her breath caught, and she struggled to maintain her composure. "What bet?" Brian's eyes widened slightly, realizing his mistake. But the damage was done. "Damn it," he muttered. "You didn't know." Harper's heart pounded in her chest as Brian's words sank in. The truth came tumbling out in a rush. How Ethan had accepted a challenge to marry someone outside his usual type. How their entire relationship had been a game to prove a point. Every interaction, every gesture, suddenly felt tainted. She found Ethan moments later, standing near the bar, laughing with a group of influential guests. Her anger boiled over as she marched toward him, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Was it all a joke to you?" she demanded, her eyes blazing. Ethan turned, startled by her outburst. "Harper, what are you talking about?" "The bet," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. "You made a bet on me. On us." The crowd around them fell silent, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Ethan's face paled, and for once, he was at a loss for words. "Harper," he began, his voice low. "I can explain." "Don't bother," she snapped, cutting him off. "I've heard enough." Without another word, Harper turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the ballroom, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. The aftermath of the gala was devastating. Harper refused to answer Ethan's calls or respond to his messages. She threw herself into her work at the community center, using the anger and betrayal she felt as fuel to push through the pain. Maya, Harper's best friend, was a constant source of support, her own anger at Ethan mirroring Harper's. "I knew he was trouble," Maya said one evening as they sorted donations. "But this, it's unforgivable." Harper nodded, her jaw set in determination. "He doesn't get to win, Maya. Not this time." Meanwhile, Ethan was left to grapple with the fallout of his choices. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of genuine remorse. The games he had played, The manipulations he had orchestrated, they had all led to this moment of reckoning. Brian confronted him days later, their friendship strained by the confrontation. "You're an idiot," Brian said bluntly. "You had a chance to prove you were more than just a billionaire with a god complex, and you blew it." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never thought—" "That's the problem," Brian interrupted. "You never think about anyone but yourself." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue. Brian was right. Despite the rift between them, Ethan couldn't stay away from the community center. He started showing up unannounced, not to manipulate or interfere, but to observe. He watched Harper interact with the kids, her passion and dedication shining through even in the smallest moments. For the first time, he began to see the world through her eye. One evening, as Harper was locking up for the night, she found Ethan waiting outside. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold. "I just wanted to see you," he admitted. "And to apologize." Harper crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "You think an apology will fix this?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "But it's a start." The days following the fallout of the charity gala were a whirlwind of emotions for both Ethan Wallace and Harper Reynolds. The veil of the Bea had been lifted, exposing the cracks in their relationship and forcing both to confront the deeper truths about themselves. For Harper, it was a moment of reckoning. Could she reconcile her feelings with the knowledge of Ethan's initial intentions? For Ethan, it was the beginning of an uncharted journey, one that required humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to truly change. Ethan had always been a man of action, accustomed to fixing problems with a snap of his fingers or a stroke of his pen. But this time was different. Sitting alone in his penthouse, the vast expanse of the Manhattan skyline stretching before him, he felt an unfamiliar sense of powerlessness. The gala fiasco haunted him. He replayed Harper's words over and over, her anger and disappointment cutting deeper than he had expected. It wasn't just about the stat anymore. It was about the person he had become, the person she had seen through from the beginning. Ethan poured himself into work, trying to drown out the gnawing guilt. But even his office, once a haven of control and achievement, felt hollow. Every decision he made, every deal he closed, seemed insignificant compared to the task of rebuilding the trust he had shattered. At the community center, Harper found solace in the routines that had always grounded her. The vibrant energy of the children, the camaraderie of her colleagues, and the tangible impact of her work provided a much-needed distraction from the emotional storm Ethan had unleashed. Maya, ever the protective friend, kept a watchful eye. "You're handling this better than I expected," she said one afternoon, her tone cautious. "I don't have time to dwell," Harper replied, her focus on organizing supplies for an upcoming program. "The center needs me, and I'm not letting Ethan Wallace derail what's important." But even as Harper said the words, a part of her couldn't ignore the questions swirling in her mind. Was Ethan truly capable of change, or was he simply trying to manipulate her into forgiving him? Determined to prove his sincerity, Ethan took the first step in what he hoped would be a long road to redemption. He reached out to the community center, offering to fund several key initiatives. Harper, however, was quick to reject his proposal. "If you think you can buy your way out of this, you're wrong," she told him during a tense meeting at the center. Her words were sharp, but her voice betrayed a hint of vulnerability. Ethan nodded, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "I'm not trying to buy anything, Harper. I'm trying to help, because I believe in what you're doing, and because I owe you and this community so much more than an apology." Harper's skepticism remained, But Ethan's persistence began to wear down her defenses. Over the next few weeks, he showed up at the center, not with grand gestures, but with quiet actions, helping to set up events, listening to the stories of the children and families Harper served, and gradually immersing himself in a world far removed from his own. The turning point came during a mentoring session. Harper led with a young boy named Jaden, a 10-year-old struggling with self-confidence and academic performance. Ethan observed from the sidelines as Harper patiently worked with Jaden, encouraging him to share his dreams and fears. "You have so much potential," Harper told Jaden, her voice filled with warmth. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Ethan watched in awe, struck by Harper's ability to connect so deeply with others. It was a side of her he had seen glimpses of before, but had never fully appreciated. In that moment, he realized just how much he had underestimated her, and how much he had to learn from her. Later, as they cleaned up after the session, Ethan approached Harper. "You're amazing with them," he said, his tone earnest. "I've never seen someone inspire people the way you do." Harper glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "It's not about me," she replied. "It's about giving them the tools and confidence they need to succeed." Ethan nodded, his respect for Harper growing with each passing moment. "I want to help," he said simply. "Not to fix anything or prove a point. Just because I believe in what you're doing." The walls between them began to crumble during a community event at a quiet park. Harper, despite her initial reservations, allowed Ethan to assist with the logistics. As they worked side by side, the tension between them softened, replaced by a tentative understanding. During a lull in the event, they found themselves sitting on a park bench, the sounds of laughter and conversation filling the air around them. Harper spoke first, her voice hesitant but steady. "I've been through a lot," she admitted. "Losing my dad, fighting to keep this center alive. It hasn't been easy, but it's what drives me." Ethan listened intently, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet humility. "I grew up in a broken home," he confessed. "My parents were more interested in their careers than in being there for me. I guess that's why I've always felt the need to prove myself." Their conversation continued, each sharing pieces of their past that had shaped who they were. For the first time, they saw each other not as adversaries, but as two flawed individuals navigating the complexities of life. By the end of the event, a fragile bond had formed between them. Harper wasn't ready to forgive Ethan completely, but she couldn't deny the sincerity of his efforts. And for Ethan, the experience had been transformative. He saw Harper not just as a challenge or a means to an end, but as someone he deeply admired, and perhaps even loved. As they parted ways, Harper turned to Ethan. "I'm still not sure about you," she said, her tone cautious but not unkind. "But I'll admit, you're starting to surprise me." Ethan smiled, a glimmer of hope lighting his eyes. "I'll take that as a win," he said. For now, the transformation in Ethan Wallace was subtle yet unmistakable. The man who once moved through life with calculated precision, manipulating situations to his advantage, now found himself grappling with emotions he couldn't control. Harper Reynolds had become more than a challenge, more than the subject of a bet. She was the force that had shattered his carefully constructed world and forced him to confront the man he had become. But Harper wasn't rushing to forgive him. Her walls, though slightly lowered, were still firmly in place. For every step forward Ethan took, she remained cautious, unsure if his newfound humility was genuine or merely another tactic. Trust, she knew, wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. In the days following their conversation at the community event, Ethan and Harper continued to navigate the delicate balance of their evolving relationship. Ethan made a conscious effort to be present at the community center, not just as a benefactor, but as someone who genuinely cared. He spent hours listening to the stories of the children and families Harper worked with, learning about their struggles and triumphs. One afternoon, while sorting donated books for the center's library, Harper noticed Ethan quietly talking with Jaden, the boy who had been struggling with self-confidence. Ethan knelt beside him, his tone gentle but firm. "Jaden," Ethan said, holding up a book about famous inventors, "you remind me of these people. They didn't have all the answers when they started, but they kept trying. That's what makes the difference. Not being perfect, but not giving up." Harper watched from a distance, her heart softening despite herself. She had seen Ethan's charm at play before, but this felt different. There was no arrogance, no ulterior motive, just a man trying to make a difference. That evening, Harper found herself lingering at the center, long after everyone else had left. The quiet hum of the city filtered through the windows as she worked on a grant proposal. Ethan, who had stayed behind to help, approached her desk with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Late night?" he asked, placing one of the cups in front of her. "Always," Harper replied, her tone neutral but not unkind. Ethan sat across from her, the silence between them stretching comfortably. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" Harper looked up, her expression guarded. "Depends on the question." "Why do you do this?" Ethan gestured to the center around them. "I mean, it's not easy work. You're constantly fighting for funding, dealing with kids who've been through things most people can't imagine. What keeps you going?" Harper set her pen down, her gaze thoughtful. "Because someone has to," she said simply. "When I was a kid, my dad used to say that we're all responsible for each other. He believed that if you had the ability to help, you had the responsibility to do it. After he died, that belief became my compass." Ethan nodded, absorbing her words. "I wish I'd had someone like that in my life," he admitted. "My parents were distracted. Success was everything to them. Emotions didn't matter, as long as you won." Harper studied him, sensing the vulnerability beneath his words. For all his wealth and confidence, Ethan carried wounds of his own, wounds he rarely let anyone see. The following weeks saw a subtle but significant shift in their dynamic. Harper began to let Ethan in, piece by piece. They shared more late-night conversations, uncovering layers of each other that had long been buried. Harper spoke of her father's passing and the challenges of growing up with a single mother who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Ethan opened up about the loneliness of his childhood, the pressure to succeed, and the emptiness he often felt, despite his accomplishments. One evening, as they walked through a local park, after an event at the center, Harper paused to admire a mural painted on the side of a building. The artwork depicted a vibrant community scene, filled with people of all ages and backgrounds coming together. "My dad would have loved this," Harper said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "He always believed in the power of community." Ethan followed her gaze, his expression contemplative. "He sounds like an incredible man." He was," Harper replied, a soft smile touching her lips. "And he'd have seen right through you." Ethan chuckled, a hint of self-deprecation in his tone. "I'm sure he would have. But I'd like to think he'd also see that I'm trying to be better." Harper turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "You are," she said quietly. "But change isn't just about trying. It's about consistency. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard." As their bond deepened, so did Ethan's understanding of what it meant to truly care for someone. He found himself prioritizing Harper's and the community center over his own interests even stepping back from some of his business ventures to focus on the mentorship program he had launched in Harper's honor. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, Ethan returned to his penthouse to find Harper waiting for him. She had brought over dinner, a simple but thoughtful gesture that took him by surprise. "I figured you could use a break," she said, setting the food on the table. "You've been working nonstop." Ethan smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and moments of quiet reflection. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't realized he was missing. The chapter ends with Ethan and Harper sitting on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights stretching out before them. They share a quiet moment, the air between them filled with unspoken understanding. "Do you ever think about the future?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "Every day," Harper replied, her gaze steady. "But the future depends on what we do now." Ethan nodded, her words resonating deeply. "Then I guess I'd better make the most of now." Harper smiled, a hint of hope shining in her eyes. "I think you're starting to get it." As they sat together, the barriers that had once divided them began to fade, replaced by the promise of something new. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Ethan Wallace had never been one to pause. His life was built on momentum, every step calculated for maximum gain. Yet, in the weeks following his deepening connection with Harper Reynolds, he found himself doing something he had never done before, stopping to reflect. The man who once measured his worth in numbers and accolades now sought a different kind of validation, one rooted in sincerity and redemption. Ethan's transformation began to manifest in tangible ways. Inspired by Harper's dedication to her community, he launched a mentorship program for underprivileged youth. Unlike the flashy initiatives of his past, this one was quiet, focused, and deeply personal. Ethan spent hours designing the program, ensuring it wasn't just another corporate ploy, but a genuine effort to create change. One morning, Harper visited Ethan's office to see the program's progress. She was greeted by the sight of Ethan sitting with a group of young entrepreneurs, discussing their ideas with genuine enthusiasm. The Ethan she saw was a far cry from the arrogant billionaire she had first met. He was engaged, attentive, and, most importantly, authentic. "You're really doing this," Harper said, leaning against the doorframe as the session concluded. Ethan looked up, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I had a good teacher." Despite his progress, Ethan faced resistance from his corporate world. Some of his board members questioned the value of the mentorship program, seeing it as a distraction from the company's profit-driven goals. Ethan, however, was unwavering. For the first time, he wasn't willing to compromise his values for the sake of business. During a tense board meeting, Ethan stood his ground. "This isn't just about business," he said firmly. "It's about responsibility. We have the resources to make a difference, and I'm not going to ignore that anymore." Harper, who had been invited to observe the meeting, watched with a mix of pride and apprehension. Ethan's determination was admirable, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As Ethan's efforts gained traction, he began involving Harper more directly in his work. They collaborated on initiatives, blending her expertise in education with his resources and influence. Their partnership wasn't without its challenges. Ethan's impatience often clashed with Harper's methodical approach. But together, they found a rhythm. One afternoon, they visited a small business Ethan had decided to support through his mentorship program. The owner, a single mother named Elena, had been struggling to keep her bakery afloat. Ethan's investment allowed her to expand her operations, hire staff, and provide for her family. "Thank you," Elena said, tears brimming in her eyes as she shook Ethan's hand. "You've given me a second chance." Ethan glanced at Harper, who nodded subtly, her expression a mix of approval and gratitude. For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of wealth had ever given him. Despite the strides Ethan was making, doubts lingered. Harper's best friend, Maya, remained skeptical of his intentions. During a late-night conversation at Harper's apartment, Maya voiced her concerns. "People don't change overnight," Maya said, her tone cautious. "Ethan might mean well now, but what happens when things get tough? Will he stick it out, or will he revert to the man he used to be?" Harper sighed, her gaze thoughtful. "I don't know, Maya, but I see something in him, something real. I think he's trying." Maya's expression softened, but her worry remained. "Just be careful, Harper. I don't want to see you get hurt." Ethan's resolve was put to the test when a prominent journalist uncovered a scandal from his past, a deal that had left hundreds of workers unemployed. The story quickly gained traction, painting Ethan as the epitome of corporate greed. The media storm threatened to undo all the progress he had made. Harper found Ethan in his office late one night, staring at the glowing skyline with a mix of anger and despair. "They're not wrong," he said quietly as she entered. "I did those things. I hurt people." Harper approached him, her voice steady. "What matters now is what you do about it. You can't change the past, Ethan, but you can take responsibility and make amends." Inspired by her words, Ethan decided to face the scandal head-on. He held a press conference, acknowledging his mistakes and outlining the steps he was taking to make things right. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. The culmination of Ethan's efforts came during a major fundraising event at Harper's Community Center. The evening was a celebration of the mentorship program's success, attended by business leaders, educators, and community members. Ethan stood at the podium, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "I've spent most of my life chasing success, thinking that wealth and power were the ultimate goals," he said. "But I was wrong. True success is about the impact you have on others, the lives you touch, and the change you create. I've learned that from Harper, and from all of you, and for that, I'm grateful." As the audience erupted into applause, Harper felt a surge of emotion. For the first time she saw the man Ethan could become, the man she believed he was striving to be. Later that night, as the event wound down, Ethan and Harper found themselves alone in the center's library. The room was quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of string lights. Ethan leaned against a table, his expression thoughtful. "I meant what I said tonight," he said, breaking the silence. "I'm not just doing this to prove something to you, Harper. I'm doing it because I want to be better." Harper stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I believe you, Ethan. But change isn't just about grand gestures. It's about consistency, about showing up every day." Ethan nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep showing up." As they stood together, the air between them filled with unspoken understanding, Harper felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real. Ethan Wallace sat alone in his penthouse, the once comforting glow of New York City's skyline, feeling cold and indifferent. The news had broken earlier that day. An investigative journalist had unearthed details about a controversial acquisition from Ethan's early career. The headlines were brutal: "Corporate Titans Rise, Built on Broken Backs." The article painted a damning picture of a young Ethan, hungry for success, leveraging every possible advantage to acquire a struggling family-owned business. The deal had left hundreds unemployed and a close-knit community devastated. While Ethan had long buried that chapter of his life, the scandal now threatened to destroy the progress he had made, not just professionally, but personally. Harper Reynolds stood outside Ethan's penthouse door, holding a paper bag filled with takeout. She had been following the news all day, her phone buzzing nonstop with texts from Maya and other colleagues. Despite her conflicted feelings, Harper knew Ethan needed someone to stand by him. When Ethan opened the door, he looked like a shadow of himself. His normally immaculate suit was wrinkled, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders. Without a word, Harper stepped inside, placing the takeout on the counter. "Ethan," she began softly, but he cut her off. "I know what you're going to say," he muttered, pouring himself a drink. "That I deserve this, that it's karma or justice or whatever you want to call it." Harper crossed her arms, her voice firm. "That's not what I was going to say. What I was going to ask is, what are you going to do about it?" Ethan slumped into a chair, the drink untouched in his hand. "What can I do? The damage is done. No apology or press statement is going to fix this." Harper sat across from him, her expression steady. "You're right. You can't undo what's been done. But you can take responsibility. You can try to make amends." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. "Do you think people will care? That it will matter?" "It's not about what people think," Harper replied. "It's about doing the right thing. You've been working so hard to change, Ethan. This is your chance to prove it." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time that day, Ethan felt a glimmer of resolve. He nodded, more to himself than to her. "You're right. I can't run from this." The next morning, Ethan called a press conference at his company's headquarters. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras trained on him as he stepped up to the podium. Harper stood in the back of the room, her presence a quiet anchor amidst the chaos. Ethan took a deep breath before speaking. "Good morning. I won't waste your time with excuses or deflections. The article published yesterday about my actions during the acquisition of Walker Industries was accurate. I made decisions back then that prioritized profit over people, and those decisions hurt many lives. For that, I am deeply sorry." The room buzzed with murmurs, but Ethan pressed on. "I can't undo the past, but I can take responsibility for it. Effective immediately, I am allocating $20 million to a fund that will provide financial support and job training to the workers and families affected by the Walker Industries acquisition. This is just the first step in a long process of making amends." As Ethan finished, the room erupted in questions, but he stepped away from the podium. Harper met him outside, her expression unreadable. "That was brave," she said finally. Ethan gave a small, humorless laugh. "I don't feel brave. I feel exposed." "Good," Harper replied, surprising him. "It means you're finally being honest." The fallout from the scandal was far-reaching. Investors grew wary, and Ethan's company stock took a hit. Board members questioned his leadership, some even suggesting he step down as CEO. Through it all, Ethan remained resolute, determined to face the consequences head-on. Meanwhile, Harper found herself caught in the crossfire. Maya, still skeptical of Ethan's intentions, confronted her one evening. "You're really standing by him?" Maya asked, incredulous. "After everything he's done?" Harper sighed, setting her coffee mug on the table. "Ethan is trying, Maya. He's taking responsibility, and he's making real changes. That's more than most people would do." Maya shook her head. "Just promise me you'll keep your eyes open." People like Ethan. They don't change overnight. I know, Harper replied softly, but I have to believe he can. The scandal forced Ethan and Harper into a new kind of partnership. Late nights were spent drafting statements, planning community outreach events, and brainstorming ways to rebuild trust. Despite the stress, their relationship grew stronger. One evening, as they worked side by side in Ethan's office, Harper glanced at him. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "This." Harper gestured to the papers spread out in front of them. "Why are you putting yourself through this? Most people in your position would just pay a PR firm to clean up the mess and move on." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because I don't want to be that person anymore. I've spent my whole life running from accountability, hiding behind wealth and power. But you've shown me there's another way, a better way." Harper's heart softened, but she kept her tone light. "You're lucky I'm a good influence." Ethan smiled. "The best." As weeks passed, Ethan's efforts began to pay off. Former employees of Walker Industries expressed gratitude for the support fund, and public opinion started to shift. Harper watched with quiet pride as Ethan faced each challenge with humility and determination. One day, she found a handwritten letter on her desk at the community center. It was from one of the former Walker Industries employees, thanking her for inspiring Ethan's transformation. Harper smiled to herself, folding the letter carefully. Ethan still had a long way to go, but he was on the right path, and she was proud to stand beside him. One night, as they sat on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, Harper turned to him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met?" Ethan considered her question, then shook his head. "I don't think I'd want to imagine that. Meeting you has been the best thing that's ever happened to me." Harper smiled, her eyes shining. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Wallace." He laughed, but his expression grew serious. "I mean it, Harper. You've changed my life. I just hope I can keep proving that I'm worthy of you." "You're getting there," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. One step at a time. The air was electric at Harper's Community Center. The annual fundraising event was in full swing, with vibrant decorations, lively music, and tables laden with auction items donated by local businesses. The space buzzed with laughter and conversation as attendees mingled, bidding on items to support the center's programs. Harper moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her warm smile lighting up the room as she greeted guests. But despite the event's success, Harper couldn't shake the weight on her shoulders. The recent scandal surrounding Ethan Wallace had cast a shadow over her efforts. Many attendees whispered about his presence, their curiosity tinged with skepticism. Harper tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the mission at hand, raising funds to keep the center running for another year. Ethan stepped into the room, his polished demeanor belying the nervous energy churning inside him. He was dressed in a tailored suit, but for the first time, it didn't feel like armor. Tonight wasn't about projecting power or control. Tonight was about Harper. He scanned the room until his eyes found her. She stood near the stage, speaking animatedly with a group of donors. The sight of her brought a sense of calm to his restless thoughts. Harper had become his anchor, the person who grounded him in a world that once felt hollow and superficial. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached her. The conversations around them quieted as people noticed his presence, their curiosity quickly morphing into judgment. Harper turned, her expression softening as she saw him. "Ethan," she said, her tone warm but guarded. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, his voice steady despite the weight of the room's attention. "This place means too much to you. And to me." As the evening progressed, Harper took the stage to thank the attendees and share stories of the community center's impact. She spoke with passion and sincerity, her words resonating deeply with the audience. But as she finished, she hesitated, her gaze finding Ethan in the crowd. "There's someone here tonight who has something he'd like to say," Harper announced, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Ethan Wallace has been a part of this journey in ways most of you don't know. I think it's time you hear from him." The room fell silent as Ethan stepped onto the stage. He felt the weight of every eye on him, the tension palpable. But as he gripped the microphone, his focus shifted to Harper, her presence giving him the courage to speak. "Good evening, everyone," Ethan began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "I know some of you may be wondering why I'm here tonight. After all, my name has been in the news for all the wrong reasons recently." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, but Ethan pressed on. "I'm not here to defend myself or to ask for your forgiveness," he continued. "I'm here to take responsibility. Over the years, I've made choices that hurt people, choices that prioritized profit over humanity. It's something I deeply regret, and I'm working every day to make amends." Ethan paused, letting his words settle before continuing. "But tonight isn't about me. It's about this incredible woman and the work she does for this community. Harper Reynolds has shown me what it means to care, to fight for something bigger than yourself. She's inspired me to be better, not just as a businessman, but as a person." Turning to Harper, he added, "And so tonight, I want to support her vision in the best way I know how." Ethan signaled to an assistant at the back of the room, who wheeled out a large check mounted on an easel. The crowd gasped as they saw the amount, $5 million. "This isn't just a donation," Ethan explained, addressing the room. "It's an investment in the future of this community. I believe in Harper, in the work she's doing, and in the lives she's changing. And I hope you'll join me in supporting her." The room erupted into applause, the initial skepticism giving way to admiration. Harper stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. As Ethan stepped off the stage, she met him halfway, her emotions a mix of gratitude and frustration. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Ethan replied, his gaze steady. "But I wanted to. This isn't about proving anything. It's about doing what's right." Later that evening, as the event wound down, Harper found Ethan standing alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The crisp night air was a welcome contrast to the warm bustle inside. "You stole the show tonight," she said, leaning against the railing beside him. Ethan chuckled softly. "I wasn't trying to." "I know," Harper replied, her tone soft. "That's what made it so powerful." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights stretching out before them. Finally, Harper turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You've changed," she said. "The man I met months ago wouldn't have done this." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes filled with sincerity. "You changed me, Harper. You made me see the world differently, made me want to be better." Harper smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that Ethan's transformation was real. As the guests departed and the lights dimmed, Harper reflected on the night's events. The community center had raised more funds than ever before, thanks in large part to Ethan's contribution. But more than that, she saw how his words and actions had shifted public perception. People who had once dismissed him as a heartless tycoon now spoke of his sincerity and growth. Back at the penthouse, Ethan sat on the couch, exhaustion evident in his posture. Harper joined him, placing a cup of tea in his hands. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Ethan asked, genuinely puzzled. For believing in this place, she replied. For believing in me. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. Always. As Harper drifted off to sleep that night, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Ethan's grand gesture wasn't just about the money. It was a symbol of his commitment, not only to her, but to a better version of himself. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future with him, a future built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. And for Ethan, the night marked a turning point. He no longer felt like a man trapped by his past. With Harper by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together, they could build something extraordinary. The quiet hum of the city served as a backdrop to the cozy setting of Harper's apartment. The evening light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a warm glow on the modest furnishings. Harper had set the table with simple, thoughtful details. A vase of fresh flowers, mismatched but charming plates, and a lit candle that flickered softly between them. Tonight wasn't about grand gestures or public displays. It was about a conversation that had been building between them for months. Ethan arrived on time, an unusual punctuality that Harper couldn't help but notice. He carried a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought a faint smile to her lips as she opened the door. "You're improving," Harper teased, motioning him inside. "I aim to please," Ethan replied with a small grin, setting the bouquet on the counter and handing her the wine. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if he understood the significance of the evening. The meal was simple but delicious. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and a medley of steamed vegetables. They ate in relative silence at first, exchanging casual pleasantries about their day. But the air between them buzzed with unspoken words, a tension that neither could ignore. Finally, Harper set down her fork and met Ethan's gaze. "So, what's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You," he admitted softly. "And us. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. How I started this whole thing for all the wrong reasons, and how, somewhere along the way, I realized it wasn't about a bet anymore. It's about you, Harper. It's always been about you." Harper's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him, to trust the sincerity in his words, but the wounds of their past still lingered. "Ethan," she began cautiously, "you hurt me. You turned my life into a game, and that's not something I can forget easily." "I know," Ethan said, his voice heavy with regret. "I can't undo what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want you to know that I'm not that man anymore. You've changed me, Harper. You've shown me what it means to care about something bigger than myself." Harper studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. What she saw surprised her. Ethan's usual bravado was gone, replaced by vulnerability and a quiet determination. "I can see that you've changed," Harper said finally. "But forgiveness isn't just about seeing change. It's about trust, and trust takes time." "I'm willing to wait," Ethan replied earnestly. "As long as it takes. I just want a chance to prove myself to you." Harper nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Then, let's start here. Tonight. With honesty." Ethan nodded in agreement, his heart pounding, as he realized that Harper was willing to give him another chance, even if it was a cautious one. As the night progressed, the conversation shifted to deeper, more personal topics. Harper spoke about her father, about how his passing had shaped her passion for helping underprivileged youth. Ethan shared stories from his childhood, painting a picture of a boy who had grown up surrounded by wealth, but starved of emotional connection. "You know," Harper said, leaning back in her chair, "I always thought people like you had it easy. But hearing you talk about your childhood, I realized that money doesn't fix everything." "It doesn't," Ethan agreed. "It gives you comfort, sure, but it doesn't give you purpose. I didn't understand that until I met you." Harper's cheeks flushed at the compliment, and she quickly changed the subject, not ready to dwell on the emotions it stirred within her. Before Ethan left that evening, he handed Harper a small box. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, noticing her hesitation. "Just open it." Inside was a simple keychain, engraved with the words, "One step at a time." "I know we still have a long way to go," Ethan explained, "but this is my way of saying that I'm here for the journey, no matter how long it takes." Harper ran her fingers over the engraving, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. Meanwhile, Maya and Brian sat across from each other at a bustling cafe, their usual playful banter tinged with a new seriousness. "You're spending a lot of time defending Ethan lately," Maya remarked, sipping her coffee. "And you're spending a lot of time doubting him," Brian countered. "Maybe it's time we both admit that people can change." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You really think he's sincere?" "I do," Brian said firmly. "And I think Harper sees it too. She just needs time to trust him again." Maya nodded slowly, her skepticism softening. "Maybe you're right. But if he hurts her again, I'll be the first in line to knock him down." "Deal," Brian said with a grin, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. As Harper lay in bed that night, staring at the keychain Ethan had given her, she felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future where trust could be rebuilt, where forgiveness could lead to something new. Ethan, on the other hand, returned to his penthouse with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The crisp morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Harper's modest school office, casting a warm glow on the stacks of books and papers that surrounded her. She sat at her desk, meticulously preparing for the day's classes. For Harper, this space was more than just a workplace. It was a sanctuary, a testament to her passion for nurturing young minds. Today, however, felt different. A sense of anticipation lingered in the air, a growing awareness that her life was shifting in ways she hadn't entirely prepared for. Ethan entered the school's modest entrance hall with an uncharacteristic humility, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He spotted Harper through the glass door of her office and knocked softly before stepping inside. "Good morning," he greeted, placing 1 cup on her desk. "Good morning," Harper replied, surprised but not unkind. "What brings you here?" "I've been thinking," Ethan began, settling into the chair across from her. "You've dedicated your life to helping these kids, to creating opportunities for them. I want to help expand that vision." Harper looked at him skeptically, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "I've been working on a project," Ethan explained, "a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, but I never had the right motivation. Until now. I'd like to collaborate with you, to create something that bridges education and real-world opportunities." Harper studied him for a moment, her heart torn between hope and caution. She had seen Ethan change, had watched him shed the layers of arrogance that once defined him. Still, the idea of trusting him with something so deeply personal made her hesitate. "Let me think about it," she said finally, her tone measured. Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. "Take all the time you need, but know that I'm committed to making this work, not just for me, but for you and the kids you care so much about. A week later, Harper agreed to meet Ethan at his office to discuss the mentorship program in greater detail. As she entered the sleek, modern space, she couldn't help but feel slightly out of place. The polished surfaces and high-tech design stood in stark contrast to the cozy, vibrant environment of her school. Ethan greeted her warmly and led her to a conference room where detailed proposals and outlines were spread across the table. Harper scanned the documents, impressed by the thought and effort Ethan had put into the project. "This looks promising," she admitted, her skepticism softening. "I want this to be a partnership," Ethan said earnestly. "Your expertise, your insight, it's the heart of this program. I'm just providing the resources." Harper nodded slowly, a flicker of excitement igniting within her. For the first time, she began to see the potential of what they could achieve together. As weeks turned into months, Harper and Ethan worked side by side to bring their shared vision to life. Late nights at the school and Ethan's office blurred the line between professional collaboration and personal connection. They laughed over coffee breaks, debated strategies with equal passion, and celebrated small victories with a quiet but growing sense of camaraderie. During one such evening, as they reviewed applications for the program's first cohort, Harper looked up from her stack of papers and found Ethan watching her with a soft, contemplative expression. What?" she asked, a hint of self-consciousness creeping into her voice. "Nothing," Ethan said, smiling. I've never seen anyone so dedicated. It's inspiring." Harper felt her cheeks warm, but quickly masked her reaction by returning to her work. "Well, someone has to keep you in check," she teased, earning a chuckle from Ethan. The program's launch event marked a significant milestone in their journey. Held at a community center in Harper's neighborhood, the event was a blend of professional and personal triumph. Local students, parents, and educators gathered to celebrate the initiative, their faces alight with hope and anticipation. Ethan took the stage to deliver a speech, his usual confidence tempered by a newfound humility. "This program isn't just about mentorship," he began. "It's about creating opportunities where there once were none. It's about believing in the potential of every individual, no matter their circumstances. And I couldn't have done this without Harper Reynolds, whose passion and dedication have been the driving force behind everything we've achieved." Harper, standing at the edge of the stage, felt a lump rise in her throat. Ethan's words were more than just an acknowledgement. They were a declaration of respect and admiration that resonated deeply with her. Despite their progress, not everything was smooth sailing. Balancing the demands of their personal and professional lives proved challenging, and moments of tension were inevitable. One evening, as they reviewed a particularly contentious aspect of the program's budget, tempers flared. "I'm not saying we shouldn't allocate funds for that," Harper argued, her voice tinged with frustration. "But we need to prioritize the essentials first." "And I'm saying we can do both," Ethan countered, his tone firm. "We just need to be strategic about it." The argument escalated until Harper finally threw up her hands. "Ethan, this isn't about strategy. It's about understanding the realities these kids face every day. Realities you've never had to live through." Ethan fell silent, her words hitting harder than she intended. Realizing her harshness, Harper softened. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "No," Ethan interrupted, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. I don't understand. But I want to. And I need you to keep pushing me to see things from your perspective." The moment marked a turning point in their partnership, deepening their mutual respect and commitment to the project. As their professional collaboration flourished, so did their personal relationship. Harper and Ethan began to spend more time together outside of work, discovering a shared joy in life's simple pleasures. An impromptu picnic in the park, a quiet evening cooking dinner at Harper's apartment, or a long walk through the city. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of Ethan's penthouse, gazing out at the glittering skyline, he turned to her with a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "Harper," he said softly, taking her hand in his, "I never thought I'd find someone who could see past all my flaws and still believe in me. You've changed me in ways I didn't think were possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you deserve." Harper's breath caught as she met his gaze. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future with Ethan, a future built on trust, respect, and love. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the secluded beach where Ethan had planned every detail of this evening. The waves lapped gently against the shore, their rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the nervous energy coursing through him. For a man who had once prided himself on unshakable confidence, this moment was a rare instance of vulnerability. Ethan had spared no effort in creating an atmosphere that reflected the depth of his feelings for Harper. The small private beach was adorned with fairy lights strung between palm trees, their soft glow illuminating a table set for two. A path of flickering candles led to the spot, bordered by petals scattered in the sand. The ocean breeze carried the faint melody of a string quartet, hidden just beyond the dunes. As Harper approached, her breath caught at the sight before her. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, the hem swaying gently in the evening breeze. Ethan stood waiting at the edge of the setup, his expression a mixture of anticipation and quiet determination. "Ethan," Harper said softly, taking in the effort he had put into the evening. "This is beautiful." Ethan smiled, his heart pounding. "Not as beautiful as you." Dinner was a blend of light conversation and laughter, but Ethan's demeanor hinted at something deeper. As the last of the dessert plates were cleared away, he took Harper's hand, guiding her closer to the shoreline where the waves kissed the sand. "Harper," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "When we first met, I was a man who thought he had everything figured out. I believed I knew what success looked like, what happiness felt like. But then you came into my life and turned everything upside down." Harper tilted her head, her expression softening. "Ethan," he held up a hand, his smile tinged with vulnerability. "Let me finish. You taught me that life is about more than winning, more than control. You showed me what it means to care about something, someone, beyond myself. You've made me a better man, Harper. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can keep growing, keep learning, and keep loving you." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. As he opened it to reveal a stunning, understated diamond ring, he dropped to one knee. "Harper Reynolds," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Not because of a bet or an obligation, but because we love each other? Because I can't imagine my future without you in it?" Tears welled in Harper's eyes as she looked down at the man who had once been a symbol of everything she resisted. In that moment, she saw not just the man Ethan had become, but the journey they had taken to get there. "Yes, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan rose, sliding the ring onto her finger before wrapping her in a tight embrace. The string quartet began to play a soft melody as they stood together, the world around them fading into insignificance. The days following their engagement were a whirlwind of excitement and planning. Harper insisted on a small, intimate ceremony, something that reflected their journey and the people who had supported them along the way. Ethan agreed wholeheartedly, eager to honor her wishes. The couple found joy in the simple acts of preparing for their future together. They visited Harper's school to share the news with her students, whose enthusiasm was infectious. Ethan's mentorship program was thriving, and he invited the first cohort of young entrepreneurs to a celebration, weaving their shared purpose into the fabric of their relationship. One evening, as they sat on Harper's modest balcony overlooking the city, Ethan brought up a question that had been on his mind. "Do you think we should write our own vows?" he asked, handing Harper a steaming cup of tea. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. "I think it's perfect. Let's make this as personal as possible." The wedding took place on a clear spring afternoon in Harper's hometown, a picturesque small town nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The venue was an outdoor garden, its natural beauty accentuated by simple decorations that reflected Harper and Ethan's understated style. The guest list was small, but meaningful. Brian Carter, Ethan's childhood friend, served as his best man, their friendship stronger than ever after the ups and downs of recent years. Harper's best friend, Maya, stood by her side as the maid of honor, her support unwavering. As Harper walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with a mix of nerves and happiness. Ethan's eyes met hers, and in that moment, the world around them seemed to fade. The man waiting for her at the end of the aisle was no longer the arrogant billionaire she had first met. He was a partner, an equal, and the love of her life. Their vows were deeply personal, a reflection of their journey and the love they had discovered along the way. "Harper," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "you've taught me more about life, love, and integrity than I ever thought possible. You've shown me what it means to truly care, to give, without expecting anything in return. I promise to stand by your side, to support your dreams, and to always strive to be the man you deserve." Harper's voice was soft, but unwavering as she replied, "Ethan, when I first met you, I never imagined we'd be standing here today. But through all the challenges, you've shown me that people can change, that love can grow in the most unexpected places. I promise to believe in you, to challenge you, and to walk with you through whatever the future holds." As the ceremony concluded, Harper and Ethan walked hand in hand through a shower of petals, their faces alight with joy. The reception was filled with laughter, heartfelt toasts, and the warmth of family and friends. Later that evening, as the stars sparkled above, Harper and Ethan stole a quiet moment together. Sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of fairy lights, they talked about their dreams for the future. A life built on love, partnership, and the shared mission of making a difference. "I can't wait to start this new chapter with you," Ethan said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Neither can I," Harper replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "We've come so far, Ethan, and I know the best is yet to come." The morning of Harper and Ethan's new life together dawned bright and full of promise. The gentle chirping of birds and the scent of fresh blooms set the tone for a day that would mark the start of something extraordinary. Harper awoke to the golden sunlight streaming through the window, the faint hum of the countryside creating a peaceful ambiance. Ethan was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in his hands, gazing out at the rolling hills beyond. The wedding reception the evening prior had been a heartfelt and joyous affair. Set under a sprawling oak tree, adorned with fairy lights, the celebration had been intimate and personal. Guests laughed, danced, and shared memories, their happiness weaving an atmosphere of love and unity. Maya and Brian had given speeches that brought tears and laughter, recalling the journey Harper and Ethan had taken to reach this day. Who would have thought? Brian had said with a smirk, raising his glass. Ethan Wallace, the man who could out-negotiate anyone, finally met his match in Harper. And thank goodness he did. Maya added her own heartfelt words, looking directly at Harper. I've always known how strong and compassionate you are, Harper. Watching you bring out the best in Ethan has been nothing short of inspiring. The couple shared their first dance to a slow, soulful melody, their steps unhurried, as if savoring every second of this moment. Harper rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they were utterly content. The day after the wedding was a quiet one, yet it brimmed with significance. Ethan and Harper began discussing the plans they had nurtured together over the past months. They wanted to merge their passions, Ethan's drive for innovation and Harper's dedication to community building. Over a hearty breakfast of pancakes and fruit, Ethan unfolded a proposal he had been working on for weeks. I've been thinking about how we can take what we've learned and share it with others, he began, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were detailed plans for a new foundation they would co-lead, focusing on mentorship and education for underprivileged communities. Harper's eyes lit up as she flipped through the pages. Ethan, this is incredible, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. It's everything we've talked about, and more. The foundation would provide scholarships, create mentorship programs, and fund small community projects. It was a direct response to the experiences that had brought them together, a testament to their shared commitment to giving back. As the weeks passed, Harper settled into her role as a co-leader of the foundation. She also continued her work at the community center, though now with even greater resources and a broader reach. However, Harper had a surprise she had been holding close to her heart, waiting for the right moment to share. One evening, as they sat by the fire in their cozy living room, Harper reached for Ethan's hand. There's something I need to tell you, she began, her voice steady but soft. Ethan turned to her, his expression attentive. What is it? She took a deep breath and smiled. We're going to have a baby. For a moment, Ethan was speechless, his mind racing to comprehend the words. Then his face broke into a wide grin, and he pulled Harper into a warm embrace. Are you serious? He asked, his voice filled with awe. Harper nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I found out a few days ago. I wanted to wait until I was sure. Ethan held her tightly, his heart swelling with emotion. This is the best news I could have ever hoped for, he whispered. Thank you, Harper. Thank you for everything. With the news of the baby, their plans for the future house expanded even further. Ethan insisted on being present at every step, from doctor's appointments to nursery planning. The foundation grew alongside their family, with Ethan and Harper hosting workshops, visiting communities, and ensuring their mission reached those who needed it most. Their efforts began to attract attention, not only in their local community, but on a national scale. Media outlets praised their dedication and the innovative approach they brought to philanthropy. Ethan, once known as a shrewd businessman, was now lauded for his transformation into a compassionate leader. On the anniversary of their courthouse wedding, Ethan and Harper hosted a celebration at their foundation's headquarters. Surrounded by friends, family, and community members, they reflected on the year that had changed their lives. During his speech, Ethan addressed the crowd with heartfelt sincerity. This journey has taught me more than I ever thought possible, he said. It's shown me the power of love, forgiveness, and the courage to change. Harper, you are my guiding light, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to the man you see in me. Harper took the microphone, her voice steady and warm. "This isn't just our story," she said, looking out at the audience. "It's a story of what's possible when we choose compassion over competition, love over fear, and hope over doubt." Thank you all for being a part of this journey. As the event wound down, Harper and Ethan found a quiet moment together under the stars. Harper placed her hand on her growing belly, and Ethan gently covered it with his own. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. "We've come a long way," Harper said softly, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "And we've got so much further to go," Ethan replied, his voice filled with determination. "But I wouldn't want to face it with anyone else." Their story, once rooted in a bet and built on challenges, had transformed into something far more profound. It was a testament to the power of change, the resilience of love, and the belief that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. And as they stood together, ready to face whatever came next, they knew they had already won the greatest prize of all: a life built on trust, partnership, and unwavering love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Harper and Ethan stood side by side, looking at the bright future ahead of them. Their journey had been anything but easy, filled with twists, turns, and unexpected lessons. But in the end, they found something that could never be bought: true love, redemption, and the promise of a new beginning. Their story is a reminder that change is possible for anyone, no matter where they start. Sometimes it takes a bet, a challenge, or a moment of vulnerability to reveal who we are, truly meant to be. Harper and Ethan's journey proves that even the most unexpected paths can lead to a life full of hope, growth, and love. What about you? What do you think about their journey? Was forgiveness enough, or does true transformation take more? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of love, change, and second chances. Stay tuned for the next chapter, because the best is yet to come.